Hi everyone, this is Christy Kruger, anchor and health reporter right here at WPLG TV in South Florida, and you're watching the NAB show live.
Live from Las Vegas, this is NAB Show Live, produced by Broadcast Beat. Here's your host, Janet West.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Are we having a good time at NAB? Yay! I'm here on behalf of Broadcast Beat, and I welcome you to the show on 4K. I'm going to attempt to guide my guests into the world of 4K and HDR. Now, I remember years ago when I was working with 2K, that was supposed to be the best resolution and the best aspect ratio. So we're going to be talking about why we're now going to 4K. Are we really wanting 8K? What are the expectations? But first of all, let me introduce my amazing guests. I've got Paul Turner from Telestream, who's Vice President of Enterprise Product Management. I've got Matthew Goldman, who is Ericsson's Senior Vice President of Technology, Media and Strategy. And last but by no means least, Danny Peters from SAM, Director of Creative Services. Now, we've only got a few minutes and these guys have got lots to say, so we're going to skip the bios and get straight into what is happening in the industry. I'm going to ask you a question. Do we really need all these pixels for 4K?
Well, I guess I could start on this. So, when you look at Ultra HD, I think it's important that some people, when it originally came out, they think of it as just being more spatial resolution, more pixels. But since then now that we're still moving forward, we actually have other aspects of immersive viewing that are looking to be much more important or much more impact to the viewer. The big one being, which you're seeing around the show hall today, is high dynamic range. And then you have the combination of high dynamic range, wider color gamut, and deeper sample bit depth that actually give you quite an immersive viewing experience. The problem with 4K itself is that because you have 4 times as many pixels, is it changes the plant. And also there's a viewing distance issue as well. If you don't sit close enough to the display, you might not realize all the benefits of it. So if you're really looking at an immersive viewing experience, it's all these aspects together. So if you're looking for the best, so to speak, bang for the bit, it would probably be high dynamic range with a combination of wide color gamut.
Paul, what do you feel?
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
You see over and over examples where somebody has a 4K monitor with standard dynamic range next to an HD monitor with high dynamic range, and by far the winner is always the high dynamic range. I think that's the game changer that we're really looking at. 4K helps. We certainly can make use of the spatial resolution improvements, but the real bang for the buck, I would agree, is HDR.
And the question is not really, do we need more pixels, but how do we respond better to that image? And I think if you look at the temporal resolution, spatial resolution, if we just gave you more pixels, but kept the color space and the contrast ratio the same, then you're really not going to have the same emotional response to that image as when you add all of those together. So when you look at the frame rate, you look at the color description for those pixels, and you look at the contrast ratio, we look at that and we feel happy. We get a warmer, fuzzy feeling. That's a better image to look at than just more pixels in standard dynamic
I think
range.
frame rate is a really important thing
Yes.
to mention too. When you get to a 4K monitor, you've got this huge plane that you're viewing, and for a lot of fast motion, you really need to beef up that frame rate too.
Yeah.
If it's complex motion.
If it's complex
I mean, obviously, I guess we should be saying this as well. The advantage of all these several immersive viewing experience changes in this next generation television really has a lot to do with, like you said, the emotional feedback that you get from people. So it's the combination of all those together. But obviously, if you're looking at a talking head, you're not going to get much more from high motion from that. But if you have complex motion, because the displays are bigger and you're sitting closer to them to realize that extra resolution, then any motion itself will be seen, and more motion artifacts will be there if the frame rate is too low. So particularly for like nature documentaries, if you're filming a tiger running by, or any sports that are like, especially auto racing, horse racing, or even American football or soccer, same type of thing.
Not everybody's taken up on 4K yet, so who are the first people to take it up and why? Because it's not even going to be used at the Olympics, is it?
Well, it's a proof of concept at the Olympics. Again, the biggest, I think all of us agree that we would like to have all of these immersive viewing technologies possible. The issue with 4K is just that it's difficult to do in even high frame rate because it changes the plant. If you're in the uncompressed domain and you're using this, it's 12 gigabits per second. And so that's a lot more storage, and obviously the network infrastructure is a lot higher to do that. Where, for instance, if you're with full HD or 1080p, it would be a 3 gigabit per second plant, and all those are built. So if you're running out to the Olympics and you're setting up an IOC for that, an International Operations Center for doing that, then obviously it's much more difficult to build a 12K plant. So that's why a lot of people are saying, well, it's really do tests. Plus, there's not critical mass of having 4K TVs in the home yet, and where's the money? And it's always going to be about the revenue. But if you go back to this, if you can give near the same experience without actually using that extra difficulty of the higher frame rate or the higher spatial resolution, if you can't do it, obviously we would like you to do it, but if you can't do it, let's do high dynamic range with wide color gamut and the deeper sampling bit depth, and then all displays that are being sold today, they all upconvert from 1080p, which is the full HD, to 2160p, which is 4K. And yes, it's not quite the same, but for most viewers, they probably won't see the difference in that, but they will see the high dynamic range. Absolutely.
And the other thing we've got to consider as well is, how do you deliver this to people at home to physically watch the media? And again, I would agree that all of these sets have some form of upconversion in them. They're generally pretty good in most cases, although they may mess up the motion a little bit. But we need to be able to cleanly and easily deliver that media, and until we can do that, we've got a real problem for getting the
when it comes to content delivery, when you look at 4K, we're starting to see some of the OTT providers, if you like, getting there with delivering some 4K content for entertainment, more so than the kind of traditional broadcasters. And so I think when it comes to the technology, it's there. There are ways of getting it to the viewer, but it is something that we're just at the starting process.
I guess to answer your original question, we got sidetracked a little bit. Who's first? So clearly with theatricals and episodics, when you can provide it in a service where you can stream that over the internet to an Ethernet connection on a internet-enabled television and things like that, then you're able to get it to it. When you're doing it through a live workflow, there's many more paths it has to go through to do live production. So when you can plan for this all in advance and get it all pre-recorded and then play it out, that's much simpler than actually doing live production through the various stages of squeeze and tease, lower thirds, graphic overlays, etc. like that. They all have to go through this equipment. It's a big challenge.
Okay, but if we look at the market now, we're going much more mobile. Everybody wants to look at content on the go, and they're on much smaller devices. So do we need 4K for that?
I would say the emotional response to a good quality image and the screens that can reproduce that. And I'd say that I would look at some of the 4K smartphones that you have there. You've got, companies like Qualcomm in San Diego doing chips for smartphones and for tablets.
Yeah.
And so I look at friends of mine who show you their latest phone. Look at the quality of the images there. And if you can take that experience to a larger screen, I think people will respond to that.
So along those lines, so there's a proper viewing distance and there's a lighting situation.
Yeah.
So mobile presents a particular challenge for that. Let's talk about the first one. So the proper viewing distance to actually see full resolution of 4K or 3840 by 2160 is 1.5 picture heights away. So if you have a full-size tablet and you're on like an airplane or you're sitting on your lap and you're holding it about right here, you really can resolve that 4K image, so it'd be really great. If you're doing that outside during the day, how many times you try to read emails you can't see, and you're doing this, you won't see anything. So again, it really does, the viewing environment with a mobile device really does impact it. But if it's nighttime or you're inside, absolutely. Now, if the display is really, really tiny, you'd have to hold it here. And I don't know about my fellow panelists, but I'm of the age where you can't see anything in there anyway. So you have to have a tablet that's big enough to view.
And I have to say, there's a whole lot of FUD and hype being put out on 4K. I saw an ad for a notebook with a 4K display on it. It's this big.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know about you, but
proper viewing distance right here.
Type it. It's impossible for me to use a laptop if it's in. And so, there's an education thing that's going to have to be in there, because if we don't do it right, people will spend money on these things and not see a difference, and that's going to be a bad thing.
I guess that's our biggest worry, is we want to make sure that people understand that these new immersive viewing experiences can be really excited if it's done right. And there's always a concern, without bringing up the bad term of 3D.
Oh, there it comes.
I hate doing the 3D. We don't want this to be repeated that where, because it was brought up more quickly than perhaps it was ready to be done, some people had a bad experience with it. And this is just particularly exciting new technology that really does improve your content viewing. And so we don't want it to go down that same path.
But I would say, regardless of that issue, if you take a look at an HDR image at any distance,
yeah, it
looks
pops.
Spectacular in comparison to SDR. HDR is here to stay. We get used to it. We're going to have to deal with it. It does add some complexities because it's non-linear. So all the internal processes that we're used to doing are going to be more complex because we're dealing with a non-linear signal. But it's here to stay.
So, Danny, what are the pros and cons of 4K for a broadcaster?
I think being able to acquire with the kind of the cameras that we have and the sensors that we have, we can acquire that image, and I think keeping it for a longer time at that quality, whether we deliver it today or we down convert and deliver it through our HD infrastructure, but having that acquired at that high resolution, knowing that the end user, the people that go to Best Buy, will eventually change their sets to better display sets that can show 4K and HDR. We're seeing those in the market right now. I think is a good, if you like, parallel investment for broadcasters, as well as still keeping with traditional HD, because HD is going to be here for a while. And I think, as Paul is saying, if we can deliver good HD with high dynamic range as we move into the higher 4K resolution, I think it's a kind of a good investment area for broadcasters, but they still have to get the everyday bread and butter of HD.
So I agree with you, Danny.
Yeah.
I just think that that is going to be a challenge for every capture, of course, and acquisitions of film for everything, whether it's episodic or pre-produced content or live. I think the particular problem, however, for live is because there is no post-production cycle for it. Everything is done in real time, and you're passing it from one area to another, and you don't necessarily know what's going to be operated on down the road. For instance, a network might send it out to an affiliate. You don't know what the affiliate's going to do there. They're going to put a logo on it. Maybe there's a different interstitial that's going to be inserted, or we haven't even talked about that. The difference in dynamic range between the main essence and an interstitial might cause all sorts of issues, but it's all those in-between processing points. So it could be 10 or 20 points where it gets touched. It's getting all those together, because like every transition, analog to digital, SD to HD, and now this, there's always going to be islands of implementation. And until the entire workflow works together for live production to get it all done, that's going to be the biggest challenge.
And it may end up being as special events or speciality events. You mentioned the Olympics earlier. That may be something that, as a broadcast technology experiment, we say specific channels where we can keep it more controlled. Because, you know, the same thing when we went from 4:3 to 16:9.
Exactly.
And we still see that in some markets when you cut to the commercials. What happens?
Right.
We still, after all these years of HD, haven't solved that.
Well, there was a way to solve it. Active format description, but it's not doing it.
Yeah.
Right? So.
You mentioned earlier that consumers, some have bought 4K sets, and I don't know what they're watching on it, but they're probably not watching a lot of 4K programming. But I'm seeing a certain competition between HDR and 4K. What's it going to take to get HDR to the consumer, and is that going to...
Well, that's already happened right now.
Right.
I mean, if you went to the Consumer Electronics Show in January, you saw a whole bunch of sets that were out there starting to sell it this past holiday season. And of course, this is the infancy of HDR as well. So they call them HDR, they call them wide color gamut. Most of us in the industry say it's higher dynamic range. I wouldn't exactly call it high dynamic range. And it's wider color gamut, but I wouldn't exactly call it wide. And they're going to progress over that over the years. But the standardization behind that is already in place. They're not done yet, most of the stuff. I've been working on this, a lot of this. Both Ericsson's working on that as well as myself. Personally, you know, we're going to finish by the end of 2016, first half of 2017. But here's the interesting thing. There always comes a time when products are brought to market while the standards are being developed.
Yeah.
So there's 2 or 3 years of things where, well, you know, it doesn't do everything that maybe you'd want it to be able to do.
And I think that will slow some of the adoption by our customers Until there is absolutely a standard that they know that the building gear, building infrastructure, on the 4K front, you do a live event, it's live, it's 12 gig. How are you going to make money for all the money that you put in there? So people are naturally a little leery, because frankly, I think, to raise that horrible spectre again, a number of our customers got burnt with 3D.
Yeah, they just certainly did.
You know, they invested in technologies that are of absolutely no use now. And so I think there's a number of people who are a little gun shy at this point in time. But once you get to that tipping point, and you know, if my wife can tell the difference, or my children can tell the difference between a non-HDR and an HDR program, everybody can tell the difference.
And I think that's right. I mean, the idea that if the consumer can see the difference, if I can walk into my high street shop and I can look at different sets and respond to something in HDR, right? If we've got the consumer saying you can do that as your next investment in a TV, and you know that content is starting to come, and that, as I said, maybe through the OTT providers and streaming first, right? Then I think we have a slightly better chance of making this more successful, because it's not being pushed from just one area of the industry. We're seeing it at the consumer TV set manufacturers, the camera acquisition sets, and now we've got to work out in the professional space how we deliver that through traditional broadcast networks to getting that to the home. And that's going to take some time. It's not going to happen by the end of 2016. It's an emerging technology.
So what is the time frame for HDR and 4K?
Well, I mean, it depends. Well, it's already now for.
I mean, total take-up.
The total take-up. It's hard to say because, for instance, if we leave terrestrial broadcasting out of it, there's really not a. In 2017, there won't be a lot that's actually stopping someone from doing it, other than the cost of doing the productions. There's always a cart and horse issue where where's the content, because the content is going to drive it, and that's what we're seeing with episodics and with motion pictures right now. Of course, is that you've seen them. There's a lot. Almost everything is done in 4K now, as far as they're concerned. And then maybe when they show it, they'll down convert it to HD before it gets broadcast. So all archiving is being done that way. So we're going to see this start moving forward. Again, so 2017 would be the time frame where you could do it, but then we have to come down to, unfortunately, we have to worry about the economics. And so most of the 90 percentile of out there that is watching the stuff is still HD, and that's where the bread and butter is. So then they have to decide, do I want to dedicate the bandwidth towards this? And that's when we start going into, okay, if I want the next generation viewing experience and I don't have the bandwidth, do I do nothing and just stand by? Or do I do the thing that we were talking about earlier, which some people call enhanced HD, other people just call it another form of Ultra HD, which is a 1080p HDR WCG, the wide color gamut with it as well. But again, it has to do with, do you want a plane to be first, or do you want to stand back a little bit and be a fast follower? So if you're going to be a fast follower 2018, 2019, it probably won't get on the air broadcasting until much after that. I mean, I don't know if you guys agree with that.
I absolutely do agree with that. But we're also seeing this, I think, change in terms of how we as consumers want to view media. And we talked about, is it on a really small phone? Is it in a decent-sized tablet? Is it on a laptop or computer screen? The way we consume media changes. And I think that is a challenge for all content providers when looking at technology change like 4K and HDR.
Obviously, technology changes. We have to keep going with the flow, as it were. But consumers, a lot of them bought into 3D, and it didn't really take off. Is this going to be another one? Because you brought up, Danny, just now that consumers, when they really see the difference.
But here's one difference in 3D that the three of us are all hoping is going to happen. 3D itself, or the 3D they came out with, is stereoscopic 3D. It's not like you had holographic images coming in. And there's certain problems just with stereoscopic 3D that are innate in the human visual system. A lot of people have parallax problems where it actually makes them ill. Now, obviously, if you're sitting very close to a TV or display, and someone shoots the material wrong with doing fast zooms and stuff, it will also make you ill. If you go to an amusement park, they deliberately do that. But if it's shot right in that way, you won't have the same problems that you have with 3D, because higher dynamic range, wider color gamut, and frankly, the higher resolution, high frame rate for that matter, reflects real life. Where 3D, it's different than what they were showing. So we don't, if it's done right, we don't think you're going to have the same problems that we have with 3D.
And you don't need special glasses.
That's right.
To be able to watch it.
And I would also say that perhaps the reason why 3D wasn't successful was because not enough consumers bought into the concept.
Yeah.
And I think it's very different when you talk about high dynamic range, when you're talking about a photographic resolution of about 14 stops. It kind of mimics the way our eyes work. We can see things in really low light. We can go from a really sunny, bright outside scene, go into a movie theater, drop our phone underneath the seat in front, and bend down and see it and pick it up. Our eyes adjust, and so the fact is that we can recreate real life through these HDR and WCG workflows and display to the consumer in a way that they don't have to do anything different than just view it.
Yeah. But as Paul pointed out, with 3D we have the glasses, and if you've got a better experience and you can share it with some family and friends, then obviously that's an advantage.
Exactly.
Paul, I want to ask you a question. We're both British, but you're living in the States, and we both know that living rooms in the States are enormous large compared to what we have in Europe. Is that going to make a difference? Because Matthew was talking earlier about the viewing distance, this sort of thing. Because we had this, didn't we, with HD, when people wanted to have the big screens, we couldn't get back far enough.
Right.
What's your
There's a bizarre corollary here. In fact, you want to be close to a 4K monitor to get the full benefit of it. So if your room is wide but very narrow, you're in great shape. I think it is absolutely the case that the viewing environments are substantially different wherever you are geographically.
Yeah.
And I think that's also, frankly, going to have some impact on adoption.
Yeah.
Because you really do have to be, as you say, 1.5 pixels. We can resolve what it is, one arc minute.
Yeah, it's 1 arc minute of resolution we can resolve. Well, everybody can resolve, but some people can resolve much more than that. But to your point about that, I think it's also important to accept that if you go back 20 years, what you felt was the de rigueur, or where the normal, you'd sit back from a TV, you sat roughly 9-10 picture heights away from a standard definition TV. So when you first brought those huge, remember when 42 inches was a huge TV?
Yeah.
Okay, now that's considered small, but when you first brought those in, people go, oh my God, I can't sit that close to it, I have to sit back from it. And in fact, you've gotten used to the fact that most people will sit at 3 picture heights back. The great thing about sitting 3 picture heights back, which is 9 or 10 feet or about 2.7 meters back, that happens to be about the right viewing distance for HD resolution. Unfortunately, you have to have that again for Ultra HD in order to fully realize. It's not that you won't realize any if you get close, but to fully realize the gain on it. And as Paul had mentioned briefly earlier, I think we should emphasize this one more time. Is that important? Your HDR monitor could be on the other side of your house. You will still see it. And that's really what I mean about it just being, it's a wow factor. You don't have to go, I don't see the difference. Well, you do see the difference in this. And we've done this, Ericsson in our own booths. We've done it in previous years here at NAB and other shows where we'll actually show 2 exactly same size monitors. We'll have you stand at a certain distance away showing the same content. One is showing 4K standard dynamic range and the other one is showing HD high dynamic range, and people will say which one is higher resolution. They'll all point to the HDR display, even though it has 1/4 the spatial resolution, because the human eye interprets contrast as resolution, and that's really why high dynamic range just pops when you see it.
Okay, we've got a couple of minutes before the break. What are you hoping to see on the show floor that's going to be quite dynamic with 4K? Are we expecting to see anything new in cameras or?
Well, I think the cameras are all already 4K capable
as
it is. I suspect that you'll see lots of HDR. I really do, because it pops. It just makes the picture so much more realistic.
And being from Sam, I'm going to say that, 4K HDR, we've done it. I'm looking forward to looking at some new 8K displays.
Okay.
You know, I think HDR is going to be the big buzz. And when a lot of people say HDR, again, for those of us that are in the industry, it's really the combination of 3 factors. It's the high dynamic range, the wide color gamut, and the deeper or 10-bit sampling bit depth all together that gives you that look and feel by it. The issue with 8K, of course, I like it too, and it's great if you're on a wall and you're actively pushing buttons. But if you're in a laid-back environment and you just want to watch it on your tablet or that, for 8K, you're now at 3/4 picture height away to be able to see all the resolution, and it has to be shot completely different because you're going to be turning your head to see all the information. So we haven't even talked about that, the different productions that needs to be done when you start moving up the subtitle. Everything.
Yeah, exactly, where your eyes search the image to get the detail, because there's so much more detail presented.
So just as we talked in when high definition first came out, nobody would ever watch news on high definition, but of course we do now. Is that going to be the same thing? We'll start watching everything on
I think
4K?
so.
I mean, once it becomes mainstream, it's like anything else. Let's take an example in the consumer electronics industry. It's going to be hard to find an HD display under 60 inches soon. Why? Because they're running 2 production lines, it's expensive, and as soon as the cost of the technology comes down to a point where it's more expensive or economically less viable to do 2 lines, they're going to run it as 1, you're going to get anyways. That's why all the TVs are 3D, even though people don't TVs.
We could talk for hours on this, and we are going to continue talking about 4K. I'd like to thank my guests, Danny Peters, Matthew Goldman, and Paul Turner. We're going to have a short break, and then I'm going to be back with some more guests to continue the discussion in 4K. Stay with us, and see you in 5.
Hi, I'm Michael Kim of 120 Sports. You're watching NAB Show Live.
Live from Las Vegas, this is NAB Show Live, produced by Broadcast Beat.
Hey, welcome back, everybody, and it is my pleasure. We've been talking about 4K and HDR, and it's my pleasure to introduce 3 more guests. I have Klaus Weber, who is worldwide product marketing of imaging products from Grass Valley, Fred Maddox from Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and Fabio Mura, who is from Vnova. Welcome, gentlemen. I'm not going to read the bios because we got into a really good discussion beforehand, and I'd rather our guests who are watching online on broadcastbeat.com and on nabshow.com get them to learn a little bit more about 4K. So I'm going to start with you, Klaus. Do we really need 4K?
Yeah, that's a question. I think if you look a little further back, it took approximately 30 to 40 years to go from black and white television to color television. It took another 35 years or so from color SD till we got HD. And it's now just 10 years or less we have HD television. So let's say from this perspective, it's actually too early for a new standard. And on the other hand, as we all know, the technology allows us to go to a much, much better format as we have it currently. And it's a question, is it the right time now? Is the consumer ready to invest into a complete new technology? And it's a question you cannot simply answer with yes or no. It really depends from which point of view you take it.
Okay. And Fred, from a broadcaster, this is a huge investment that you guys are going to have to make.
Yeah, it's like, as Klaus says, all of these kinds of standards changes involve complete retooling, complete reinvestment, but over time. And I think that at the end of the day, the important thing is not whether it's the time for 4K. The consumer's already decided that, predicting 23% penetration of 4K sets this year. If you look at content generation around the world right now, there's a lot of it happening in 4K. But I think there are other things about the consumer experience and how do we actually take the value of a more immersive consumer experience that 4K promises with things like HDR and looking backwards at perhaps HDR with HD and things like that.
Okay, and Fabio, do we really need all those pixels?
Well, I think we talked about the technology and the cost to deliver it, and I'd like to, when I think about it, I like to reverse it. Do we need it? I think we want it. I think, the consumer wants it. I think as consumers of entertainment, we want to be more immersed, and I think, more immersive experience, whether it's a larger screen or better color, makes sense for a consumer perspective. Where we're a little bit stuck at the moment is, how quickly and how well we can deliver it as an industry. And where we come in is like, we provide a solution to kind of leverage the infrastructure that is out there today to enable these services as soon as possible.
So how are we going to deliver 4K?
Well, it means enabling a whole delivery chain, right? From the acquisition all the way to the TV sets. And I think actually, the two endpoints are the most developed. There is a lot of things in between that are very costly to upgrade. So we recently actually announced a deployment for with Eutelsat, it's going to cover the Euro 2016 championships, football, soccer here in America, in 4K. And even though it's contribution, there is an issue, right? There's like, most stadium in Europe are fiber are 1 gigabit per second, right, in contribution. That's, ripping up cables, putting new ones is costly. You go to the other end and the consumer end, there's a massive population of devices that, have been installed over the years that theoretically would have to rip up and replace. That's a massive amount of infrastructure investment for a broadcaster, from an operator. Where we come in is like we have a solution to kind of help turbocharge the existing infrastructure to be able to deliver 4K without doing that, without incurring all of those costs.
Yeah.
It's possible.
Okay.
I think that one of the interesting things about it is, though, it's an opportunity. A problem is actually an opportunity, because one of the things that is going to help us, certainly at scale with 4K is the conversion of live programming infrastructure to IP. And we're going to do IP for a whole bunch of reasons. 4K is just one of them. And it just opens the path to a whole different, richer world in terms of media infrastructure, I think.
From a production point of view, I remember when we had HD come in, we had to teach sports cameramen to shoot a little bit differently compared to the old way. Is there a whole new way that we're going to have to be teaching the camera crews, Fred, within a broadcaster as to how to shoot properly?
I don't think so. I remember the conversion to HD, and I remember the conversations we had about, will we edit differently, will we frame differently, will we be able to afford the sets that we're going to require because of the higher definition. And all of that turned out to be pretty much a non-event. At the end of the day, I think somebody said it in your last panel, it's just more real. And because it's more real, it fits very, very well into existing production techniques. I think there's some other applications around 4K inside production infrastructure where you're going to do things differently, but not in terms of what actually happens with the consumer.
So Klaus, is HDR the better route than 4K? Should we be just upgrading equipment which you can do more easily with HDR? What are your comments on that?
Yeah. The thing is, what we have realized in all the different tests we did in the last couple of months with HDR is that if you compare the user benefit from going from HD to 4K and going from HD to HDR, is that the user benefit is much larger on HDR side. HDR can be seen under any, let's say, regular viewing condition, where the benefit of 4K can only be seen under very specific viewer conditions. So you need to have a really large screen, or you need to be very close to your screen. And both are not available in many, many cases. And also the relation to say, well, there is a demand on the market because so many people buy 4K televisions and we need to now transmit 4K. It's a very, I think, weak comparison, because I think we have millions and millions of 3D televisions out in the field, and there is no 3D transmission any longer.
No.
And so it's a little dangerous to only look what the consumer is buying and what we need to send as a service. Nevertheless, I believe in a request to get better images to the homes. But how these better images must look like, if they need to be 4K, maybe 8K, or UHD, HDR, or a combination of both, that's still a question.
But you bring up an interesting point with 3D. Are we looking at 4K as the holy grail, if you like, for the future, when consumers are going to say, hey guys, I just spent money 4 years ago on a 3D set, I don't really want to buy another one? How do we convince consumers? What's the driver? You've said a better experience, but I think you've got to offer a little bit more. What's the driver to get it in the home?
I think consumer culture is a quality culture when it comes to media. And you see it in phones, you see it in tablets, you see it everywhere. They're going to buy them. They're already buying them. And they're already buying them in a world where the content offer isn't well developed, where the delivery offer isn't well developed. That, to me, is evidence enough. We need to focus on how we're actually going to deliver on the promise, because they've already voted with their feet.
Right.
Yeah, I think the same. I mean, the capabilities are going to be in the homes whether we want it or not. It makes sense from a kind of production and scale perspective from the manufacturers as well to do one type of panel. Is going to support 4K, is going to support HDR, is going to support 3D and so forth. And it's not going to be the only screen. Let's not forget that actually there is a proliferation of screens and different capabilities. We hold in our hands, 2K screens every day. They're going to become 4K screens. They actually have a higher dynamic range than when we get in the home already. So it's going to be a variety of different platforms that have capabilities that we can exploit as an industry, and so we should, because they do deliver a better experience.
Yeah.
So what are you showing at Grass Valley that's going to be new with 4K, Klaus?
Sorry, I didn't understand.
Okay, what will be new at NAB
Okay, sorry.
from Grass Valley with respect to 4K?
Yeah. So we introduced approximately a year ago our first generation of UHD cameras, which was based on our HD camera systems, which use a kind of special processing to derive 4K in the best possible way in terms of sensitivity, keeping global shutter performance, and so on. And what we are introducing here on the show is our first native 4K camera system, which combines the advantages of a native imaging like a larger resolution, but also with the possibility to switch back the camera in native HD if needed. That's the first time such a system is available to the market.
So a switchable camera.
We deliver the tools to the market, what is needed to produce the best 4K in all the different environments. So are they poor lit evening matches in sports? Are they conditions under controlled lighting, such as studio production? So we have a different selection of cameras we can offer for that.
Okay. Are there any broadcasters who have started taking up 4K? Yeah?
Yeah. Yep, there are, and in Canada, notably sports broadcasters, and people who deliver a large part of their audience through OTT or high bandwidth cable. So there are. They tend to be smaller. They tend to be niche, and it is a niche at the moment, a consumer niche, but a very rapidly growing one. I think we're seeing all over the world a growth in sports production in 4K, starting probably with BT in the UK about a year and a half ago.
Fabio?
Well, I think this NAB is very important to us. We launched at NAB in 2015, so last year, with a promise that we could bring a new codec, a new technology to the industry that could provide better performance, but not only that, a better performance on existing ecosystems. So upgrade what we have to be able to deliver better pictures, larger pictures as well. So what we're doing here in 2016, a year later, is really showing that we maintain that promise. So what we've announced real deployments. As I said, we Eutelsat for coverage of Euro 2016. We have another big announcement this afternoon. We have real solutions. So here at the show, we are showing 4K delivered, at HD bit rates or 1080p bit rates on contribution and distribution circuits on existing connected devices, for example. So it's a very important and exciting show for us.
Fred, what sort of tools are you looking for at NAB to help Canadian broadcasting transition to 4K?
IP. It's all about IP. It's all about how we're able to convert our infrastructure, which is all SDI right now and not convertible, and how we make that transition, how we make that shift in a way that doesn't mortgage our future, and also IP promises a whole bunch of other benefits on the business side that we want to get as well. So we're trying to understand exactly where the promise is, where the potential is, where the innovation is. The kind of innovation you're talking about is very, very interesting to us.
So how long would you think it would take a broadcaster like CBC to fully transition to 4K?
It took us 13 years to transition to HD. We're actually just completing it now.
Yeah.
It won't take us that long, and again, that's because the answer will be IP, and the answer will be driven by things other than just the user value proposition.
Now, Klaus, when you started, we were talking about, when we went from black and white and the whole time into color and the time frames are getting shorter and shorter. What about 8K? We're already talking about 8K when we haven't even gone fully to 4K. Is that a dream? Are we just coming up with a marketing product to keep the industry going? Or is there a market for what 8K can deliver over and above what 4K can deliver?
Yeah. There are many different points you need to look to that, many different angles. One is the technology. Of course, you can produce 8K. There are demonstrations around which shows pretty nice images. But if you think about what kind of challenges would you have to have a complete workflow, a transmission channel, the displays at home, there's a lot of practical, let's say, challenges, bandwidth problems and so on. But one other thing not to forget is you asked it earlier, will we need to change our production style when you go to 4K productions? And the answer was very likely not. And I agree on that because the people got used to the way how television is made today, especially for sports, a lot of close-ups, a lot of different shooting angles from the same scene. But now think about going to 8K. Will that be still possible in 8K? I have my doubts because 8K only makes sense when the screen is really large, when the viewing conditions are really completely different than today. Because on my 50-inch or whatever television screen to have 8K is just a waste of energy because human eyes simply can't see the resolution anymore on a typical viewing distance. So it means you need to have a complete different viewing condition. But then I think the many close-ups and the quick cuttings will confuse the people very, very likely. So it means 8K has a lot of challenges from technology point of view to make it, to produce it, to transmit it, but also to consume it is in a different way. And then the question is, okay, well, if one would work on an 8K channel today, let's say, how to do it? If it's completely incompatible with 4K and HD, then it's a real big commercial challenge, how to fund such kind of channel with a relatively small amount of viewers. Would it be possible to produce in 8K and do some zoom-ins for the 4K transmission? Possibly that's maybe a solution, but on the other hand, isn't then the viewing angle and the depth of field and so all that maybe screwed up? So there's a lot of things we need to learn, I think. On the other hand, knowing that 8K is somewhere around, that makes the decision to establish a 4K service in maybe 1 or 2 years from now even maybe more difficult. And I would say very important is whatever you do, it has to be prepared for future editions. I would say a 4K service without HDR capabilities, I would say is a dead end. I would never recommend that. Similar is to do in 4K, which is locked to 4K as it is, without high frame rate, without 8K options. No option, but as you said, you are looking for IP. And of course, that's also one of the things we are telling the market. IP is the way to go to a format agnostic infrastructure. So it has to be it's a kind of locked together. But 8K, yes, it's a possibility maybe for the future, but it's some more years before I think we will have a real usable system available.
Now, Fred, earlier when I said to you, how long is it going to take for a transition, I could see your eyebrows raise as if, yes, when you're in a big institution, things do take time. From a broadcaster's perspective, what are you thinking about 8K?
Very little. At the end of the day, I think that at this point, 8K is a bridge too far for all the reasons that Klaus just talked about, and I agree with every one of them. It's just processing the compute, the storage, the bandwidth, just those fundamentals alone make it make it really difficult, and absolutely by definition, you have to be in an IP world to survive anything at 8K size. And I'm not convinced at the end of the day that that we aren't going to run out of runway with consumers. You know, at some point, where are you going to put that screen? And you know, that's got to be the answer, the question that needs to be answered, and it hasn't been answered yet. Having said that, you know, NHK has been blowing their brains out for the past number of years, proving to us that 8K is viable, and they'll be doing so at the Rio Olympics. So it'll be interesting to watch. And you know, I think the point that Fabio made earlier, we want more bits, we want better bits, we want more immersive pictures, and 8K fits in that concept somewhere. To me, the question is just whether or not it's real in certainly my career.
Yeah. 8K, Fabio, what are your views?
It's an interesting question, I think, because partly we need to understand how we're going to use it, what we're going to do with it. And you know, I'd like to talk to the broadcasters as well, to the operators, to see what kind of services they can dream of with more pixels and better images. I'm very excited this week at NAB for launching, you know, as a new technology, an SD service. Right? I mean, we're talking about 4K, we're talking about HD. We launched like last week, this week, an SD service in India, but to people that didn't get any video at all before because they're on 2G networks, right? So, and yes, the source is HD, and you know, but you know, that's what is exciting. So exciting, taking those pictures in 8K doesn't make sense. Yes. What can we do with them? Can we do, you know, digital pan and zoom in 4K? Can we dream of better services, different angles, you know, wall displays, better VR, better 360 video? I don't know. I'm pretty sure there's very clever people in the broadcast business that can dream of these services. I deep down know that, you know, give them the creative ability to deal with more pixels and more information, they will use it. So,
But Fred came up with an interesting point. You know, at what point are we going to push consumers that they're going to say, sorry, I'm not opening my wallet anymore? Perhaps what the industry has to look at is more applications for these new high-resolution devices and production methods. One of the things we haven't touched on is post-production. Have we got all the tools in post-production for 4K? Well, you've talked about cameras, Klaus, but what about post?
Certainly in this kind of cinema and episodic world, the answer is by and large yes. Where we have more difficulty is in the high volume, low cost stuff like news and so on, where the answer is probably no, at scale. I mean, you can certainly edit in 4K, you can certainly move it around inside a plant, but not with any particular ease or efficiency. And I think that's an evolution yet to come.
Yes. Any other comments, Fabio?
On 8K specifically or on 4K production, I think
what we've been talking about, we're summing up now.
I think in general, what excites me is the diversity of services, right? You know, 5-10 years ago, we were talking, okay, about launching HDs, launching 4Ks, a point-to-point, to a set-top box, to a screen. I think that's exploded. You know, the diversity of devices, the diversity of possibilities that operators and now OTT providers have, and we need to be careful. I mean, as a broadcaster, I would be careful. You know, the fact that, you know, they can launch fast, and they can be very flexible. So I think you know, the potential for innovation in this industry is very great, and we should all work together, leveraging the new technologies and the wisdom that we acquired to do so as quickly as we can.
Okay. Klaus, any final comments?
Yeah, from a technical point of view, I think post-production should not be an issue. There are all the different tools available. It's more a question of money, because you need 8 times more bandwidth, go from a regular 1080i to 4K. And and for a high-end, let's say, glossy film style production, this extra bandwidth might not be a real problem. A complete news installation from a broadcaster to go to 8 times bandwidth requirements for audio editing suites, or that might be a commercial challenge, not a technical challenge, more a commercial challenge.
Okay. This has been a really fascinating discussion. You pointed out one thing earlier, Fabio, about AR and VR. If we're going to have that in 4K, that presumably is going to create a really interesting experience.
Well, but if you think about it, we're talking about bigger screens, but we're putting a pretty high resolution screen very close to our eyes, with a lens to it, so we see pixels. So we do need better resolutions, and as we move around, we see a portion of a larger pixel. So it makes sense to deliver that at the highest resolution possible, so that then the experience can be managed in the most immersive way. So I see 4K playing a big role in VR, AR.
Yeah. Well, believe it or not, guys, we are out of time. This is, as I said, it's been a fascinating discussion. And I really want to thank all my guests from the first half, Paul Turner, Danny Peters, and Matthew Goldman. And from this session, Fabio Mura, Fred Maddox, and Klaus Weber. Thank you very much, guys. And join me this afternoon for Media Asset Management at 3 o'clock. So it's goodbye from me, Janet West, and stay safe in Vegas.